Let's turn in our Bibles to Revelation 21. Revelation 21, just about to the very end of the Bible. But I want to focus on a thought here. Actually, I was at work this week and I began to think along these lines. And I want to draw your attention to Revelation 21 in the last few verses there of the chapter. Verse number 22 is where we'll begin. And I saw no temple therein, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it. And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. And the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. And the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there. And they shall bring the glory and honor of the nations into it. And there shall in no wise enter into it anything that defileth, neither whatsoever worketh abomination, or maketh a lie, but they which are written in the Lamb's book of life. And so this morning I want to focus a little bit on this issue as we're right here at the very end of the book of Revelation. There's plenty in there that are, it's challenging, it's difficult maybe for us to properly comprehend and even wrap our minds around and even deal with almost in an emotional way, because there's some challenges, some real challenging circumstances in the book of Revelation. But now Satan's already been dealt with by this point in Revelation. So we're right here at the very end where everything is good, it's peaceful, it's wonderful. But notice what he's saying here in these few verses. There are some things that will be in heaven, and there are some things that will not be in heaven. And we can recognize, obviously, there are different things. The saints will be there, the sinners won't. Obviously, we are concerned about that. That's we want the sinners to be won to the Lord. And so that's an important part to remember. But that's not necessarily our main focus today. We might even think, well, there'll be lots of praise there. And there won't be any pain or sickness or suffering or death anymore. And that's wonderful. That's good too. But maybe, again, not exactly what we're focused on today. You know, you and I have gotten used to options and features and different things that are included or not included. Maybe you're at a car dealership and you want to really make sure that this particular thing is included. This thing is on this vehicle. And so when you ask him, maybe he sort of smiles sadly and shakes his head. No, sorry, not on this one. Not this model. Not this particular vehicle. Whatever else he may say, probably trying to convince you that it's still a good car, it's still a good purchase. You ought to go ahead with this. But we want to know what things are included and what things aren't. There was a time, numbers of years ago now, but not too terribly far from here, that we went to a particular dealership and or car salesman, whatever you say. I'm not sure now even the name of it. But anyway, went in there and we're looking for a little larger vehicle, and so we found this one. We were ready to drive it, and so we got the key, we headed out, and I began hearing something in the back of the vehicle that I wasn't quite sure about at the time. I didn't know what they were. I didn't know anything about it, really. And I kept hearing this noise. I thought, well, maybe something's wrong with this. I don't know what that is. And then finally, I think maybe I even stopped and I got out and I was looking around and I couldn't tell for sure. And we got back to the sales place there, and I mentioned the issue to the salesman, and come to find out, it had a feature he didn't even realize was there, some sort of auto-leveling feature, and what I was hearing was the compressor. And so anyway, he didn't even know what he was offering to me altogether. And it was pretty nice, I suppose, but he didn't know that was even included. Sometimes we kind of wonder maybe a little bit about some of the different things that are included or not included, or what's in heaven or what's not there. What can we look forward to, and what is there anything? Obviously, we know that there's nothing that will be what would I say? Kind of God chose a bad thing for us. That everything is for our good and for His glory, and it's just because He wants to do wonderful things for us. And yet there may be something here in this passage that we could focus on, several things here that are not in heaven. And you might think, well, who wants to focus on what's not there? I mean, we know sinners won't be there. And, that if it's a loved one especially, then that's really tragic. That we don't even want to think about that kind of thing. So, what else? What is there something that is not going to be in heaven that we'll be glad for? Well, I think there are. There's several things here. Maybe some of it will be convicting, but a lot of it probably will be uplifting and encouraging to us. So let's focus on that for just a few moments. The first one we notice here is that there will be no faith. Now, that might sound strange because faith is a good thing, right? We're supposed to have faith. We're supposed to keep holding on to God, and we're supposed to keep looking toward Him, and we're walking this journey toward heaven by faith, and that's good, that's important. But notice what it says there in verse 22, and I saw no temple therein. No temple. What does that signify? Well, there's no need for church anymore. There's no need for walking by faith. There's no need to go through all of this, the normal things of worship, because now God and the Lamb are the temple of it. So in a sense, you might say that every one of us gets to come literally, anyone who knows the Lord can come literally right there into the throne room of heaven. We'll be with the very one we've been worshiping by faith. We will see Him. It won't be by faith any longer, but it will be by sight. It'll be walking by sight. We'll be with Him and in His presence. Notice here, just a few moments, He's going to be the light of it. It'll be all over. And so, all over heaven, anywhere that we are, His presence will be there. And so we don't need to have faith anymore, because that faith will have translated to sight. And we will see Him. We will be with Him. We will be able to be in His presence and talk to Him, could I say, face to face. And so really, there will be no need for that anymore. And no need. We've walked by faith so long, and so many times we don't have the answers, and we don't see clearly, and we're wondering what God has in mind, and why do I have to face this storm, and why am I going through these circumstances, and why is the devil so mean, and I can't always see what's going on? Why do I have to guard against deception? And it just goes on and on and on. Because this is a walk of faith. Some of you may have even read Pilgrim's Progress from time to time, maybe, and just thought, oh, if I could just see my enemies like Christian could. He could see that the giant is there, or the dragon is there, and he could see what he's fighting against him, and we can't. We're walking by faith. Well, I understand that. Maybe it seems like, the grass is greener type of thing, and well, surely if it was a little different than what it really is, I would have an easier time. I don't know that that's true, but we almost think of it that way. And yet what I want us to recognize here this morning is that one day, when we step across to the other shore, our need for faith will be over. We'll see very clearly. As 1 Corinthians 13, now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. God help us to keep the faith until there is no longer any need for it. Again, I know it's difficult to live by faith. We go through the spiritual battles and we don't understand the Christian life sometimes. And really, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. It's not that we are, battling in the flesh. We are in the flesh still, but it's the battle is really not one we can see, but is the spiritual battle. And the battles of the mind and the heart are hard to identify sometimes. We're finite. We can't see all that God is doing or what He's wanting from our trials. And we want answers. We want to know what's going on. We want to know what He has in store. And what a blessed day that will be. Though we're required to trust right now, when finally faith will be done and sight will take over. We'll be with Him and we'll know him. We'll see him as he is. Amen. No faith. No need for faith when you get to heaven. Keep the faith now until you get there. But not only is there no need for faith, but there's also no night there. He mentions that in verse 23. The city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. And here we find that God's all we need. You know, many times we may think of all sorts of gorgeous lights, maybe, and we imagine the mansions and all the glistening and we might in our minds, think of this brilliant chandelier and all those things, or maybe some gold, fixtures or whatever of the lights, and you have all these things in mind of what we think of as being beautiful. But nothing can beautify heaven more than Jesus himself. His glory is the light of it. His presence is what lights it up. Now, we usually associate unpleasant things with darkness, don't we? Fact is, I think it's back in John 3 that tells us kind of the Scripture connects darkness with evil things. Men loved darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. And kind of think along those lines. It's John 3, I think it's 19 and 20. Sometimes maybe we even fear the dark because many times we think of dark or the darkness being when bad things happen. I'll confess to you, sometimes I've walked into the woods in the early morning when it comes time for hunting season and walking in there, and I'm wondering what's just outside my beam of light, We don't like the dark. We don't like to not be able to see. But in heaven, now I know we're not dealing with ravenous beasts or vicious animals, but in heaven there'll be nothing that can hurt us. And His very character will drive away the darkness. It's just who He is. He is light. And everything will be bright. Everything will be could I say, lit up by His glory. And really, we may sometimes think a little bit about what heaven, even the light, will be like. And from what I can gather, no shadows. His presence is just all over the place. And there's no need for darkness because it's I guess you'd say eternal day. And there's no need for rest. You just go through that whole aspect there. And really that's another aspect maybe to this issue of no night. Usually for us it means that the day's ended, and maybe we might think, well, it's time to sleep and recover our strength for a new day. Well, there's no end to heaven's day. And there's no curse. There's no need to sleep and recover our strength, to press on against the rigors of this human existence. It'll be glorious. Now, I'm not saying we won't have anything to do, because again, I believe that God has things for His people to do, just as He has for the angels to do. But it is something that we can recognize we'll be done with the curse. There'll be no night. There'll be no darkness. Everything will be glorious. Our troubles are often magnified if we wake up in the night, aren't they? I don't know if you've ever discovered that. Probably you have if you've lived very long. And you wake up at night and you kind of feel like, oh, what am I going to do about this? What am I going to do about that? Well, again, there's no night in heaven, and all our troubles will be over forever. All we have to do is just revel in His presence, give glory and honor to His name. What a wonderful thing. There'll be no night. So we have two so far. No faith, because there'll be sight. And no night, because Jesus will be the light. And He will shine forever and ever. And we'll be in His presence. But let's notice another one here just a little bit further on. Actually, verse 24. We go just verse by verse here, really. In this case, verse 24 talks about how the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it, or into the city, into heaven. And so I would suggest to you, thirdly, there are no rivals. No rivals. It's no question of who's going to win. Anybody that has been exalted high in this earth and in all the glories of the kingdoms of this world, all of them will pale in comparison. And even it says here, the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. And it's as though they just come and however great their crown or their glory may have been, they just lay it before the true King, the King of kings and Lord of lords. There will be no rivals. Verse 26, they shall bring the glory and honor of the nations into it. Again, we're talking about this city. Verse 23 refers to the city there, the first few words. And then it's saying the nations, the kingdoms, the monarchs of the world, they'll be able to bring, and will have to even, bring their glory and lay it at the feet of the only one worthy, Jesus Himself. And we don't know all that that's going to involve, but all the glory belongs to Jesus, and there will be no rivals. He must be king, and He will be king. He needs to be king of our lives now, because one day, whether we have honored Him as king here or not, we will bow. We will bring anything that we have of worth before His feet, lay them there. I know we sometimes talk about, or we hear songs at least about laying our crowns at Jesus' feet. No, I don't know what all that's going to be like. I don't know if that's really how that will happen. But I do know that He gets the glory. There'll be no rivals. Nobody to say, well, I'm pretty important, and you ought to kind of, maybe I could be prime minister. Jesus is king, but I'll be prime minister. No, there are no rivals whatsoever. It's all about Him. He is the one to get the glory. All the things that we've accumulated, all the prestige or honor that seems like we've gained, will be as nothing compared to Him. And maybe I could just urge us even here this morning, let's not forget who really is important. Let's not forget that we are only lowly servants before Him. We can't do anything on our own. When we get the idea, it's kind of goes right back to Lucifer there in heaven at one time and then rising up, but he falls to destruction. Spending his time right now trying to destroy every one of us, as we know Satan is doing. But maybe we need to remember that we also must properly submit to the only one worthy. He is worthy. And really, when you start getting to the latter part here of Revelations, you find that is a key theme. He's the one worthy. He's the one who can part of that, open the seal and all the different things, He's the one. He's the only one worthy. There'll be no question in that final day who's in control or who deserves the honor, who we need to bow to. We will humbly bow before Him as our only King, the only one worthy. Well, one more. No faith, no night, no rivals. But it does tell us in verse 27 that there will be no sin. Now, for those who are ready to meet the Lord, that's a wonderful thing. To know that all sin will be gone forever. We won't ever be tempted again. We'll be able to just dwell with Him forever, and our destiny will be sealed, and we'll know we can't fall anymore. We don't have to keep sort of on, maybe this is not the best way to say this, because I know God has grace for us, but it's not like we're on nerve's edge. Well, the devil's always after me. Again, I don't want to over magnify that, but I do want us to recognize sometimes the battle is fierce and we struggle, and Lord, I want to get to heaven, but I'm in the battle. But it'll all be over with. And in that aspect, no sin is a wonderful thing to remember. Obviously, there will be judgment on sin. And that may not be something we want to focus on too much, especially if we think about loved ones who are not right with God, or those maybe that have already passed on and we are pretty fearful about their eternal destiny. That's not something we want to even think much about. But I do want us to recognize here this morning, before we finish, that there is some seriousness to this as well. Because if we want to get to heaven, and we want to know that our faith that we've held on to has finally become sight, we want to know the blessings of eternal day and God's presence and peace and joy forever. We want all those things. We want to be able to be in His presence knowing He is the conqueror. He is the King of kings and Lord of lords. We want all those things, but we have to be able to get there. And we have to remember that there is no sin that gets into heaven. Let me read it again to you, verse 27. And there shall in no wise enter into it, that's into the city of heaven, anything that defileth, neither whatsoever worketh abomination, or maketh a lie, but they which are written in the Lamb's book of life. And so right here at the very beginning of this aspect, let me just ask you, is your name written there? On the page, white and fair. In the book of His kingdom, is your name written there? That's what we need to know for sure. Because there are three things that I see here that don't get in. And we have to remember them. We have to make sure we guard against them. And so just as we kind of finish off, I'm glad for all the other wonderful messages, but maybe other truths we've even shared this morning, but maybe before we leave this truth, we should just think about this. Is there anything in my life that would keep me from heaven? Because no sin is there. And I can't just hold on to some things and think, well, somehow God will just let me in. Somehow it'll all work out and He'll understand and He'll know I'm just human. And all those things that are excuses that are made. Let me just mention to you a few things that it mentions right here in verse 27. First of all, there's nothing there that defiles. Nothing that defiles. So we might think of it a couple of different ways. Number one is morally. And so any of those things that defiles me morally, those sins of pleasure, of sensuality, morality, all that aspect of moral living, those things cannot make it in. And so even though we are living in a very sensuous day, very sexualized day, we need to remember that nothing that defiles morally goes to heaven. And so whether it passes the cultural standards of our day or not, it has to pass God's standard. Because we cannot have those things that defile us morally. Not only that, but also doctrinally. There are some things today that pass for truth that are just simply not biblical. And some people may feel like, well, I have this all worked out, and according to my church discipline, or what my church believes, or what my pastor or some prominent evangelist says, I'm okay, I'm good. But there are some doctrines that have defiled people and caused them to live far below what God expects. But there's nothing there that defiles. We need to be sure that we are pure, that we are living carefully, so that nothing about our garments are defiled. Our religious garments. I'm not talking about, those righteous robes, so to speak, like the Pharisees. That's not really what I'm referring to. But what I am saying is we need to be careful that we are living as purely, or in the purity that God has for us, that God wants us to be doing. It also goes a little further, and this kind of is in the same, pretty much the same line, but what else did it say? Nothing that shall no wise enter into it, anything that defileth, neither whatsoever worketh abomination. Again, how does that happen? That's not just saying there are objects that can't go to heaven, but those people, those individuals, those humans who are involved in abomination. Well, what is abomination? There are several maybe ideas about that, But basically, what we think of for abomination are those sins that are a stench in God's nostrils, so to speak. Those things that He hates with a passion. So what are they? Well, did you know? Sometimes we associate that with one or two things, but did you know there are probably, probably at least 8 or 10 different specific things that are mentioned? I'm going to give you just a few of them in sort of general ways. One is idolatry. And obviously we recognize that when it maybe comes to false gods, but maybe even if we set ourselves up as our own idol or our possessions as our idol. All right, so idolatry. Witchcraft is another one. Actually, there's various forms of sexual perversion. Fornication, I think, is one of them, but also homosexuality, bestiality. There's several of those that are in sexual perversions. They are considered abomination before God. You can find it. If you need to know the references, I can get them for you. Hypocrisy. Yeah. Why do you think the Pharisees, as religious as they were so greatly condemned? Because it was a stench in God's nostrils. You go through the motions of spirituality, religiosity, but you're far from God. That's kind of what he would have been saying to, the whitewashed sepulchres and all those things. He would have said to the Pharisees, or John the Baptist saying about that. So when you start getting into this hypocrisy, as even though for us it may seem like, well, it's unfortunate, but it's really not that big of a deal. No, it's an abomination before God. Numbers of these come from Proverbs. I think there's maybe 5 of them from Proverbs, some from Deuteronomy as well. Various places we could find these abominations. Sowers of discord. Ooh, boy. Is that a big deal? Just sort of, kind of, I refer to it as stirring the pot. Just sort of just a little statement here or there that just kind of gets people wrangling or kind of causes some problems. Sowers of discord. Pride. Pride is an abomination before God. Dishonesty. Twisted values, making things valuable that are not, and making things that are not valuable. No, how did I say that? Making things that are valuable not seem valuable, and those things that are not valuable seem valuable. It's there. Various times where God through His Word has said these things are abomination, and the Bible tells us right here at almost the very end, whatsoever worketh abomination will not enter into heaven. So there's no sin, nothing that defiles, no abomination. And then one other thing I'll mention to you, and I've touched on it a little bit already, but there's nothing untrue. Neither whatsoever worketh abomination or maketh a lie. Or maketh a lie. Nothing untrue, whether that's in speech or a profession or whatever. Nothing that's, in fact, it tells us also all liars will have their part in the lake of fire. And so we need to remember that there are some things that will not be in heaven, and we need to be sure we're not part of that number. We're not getting involved in those things, whether it's in various forms of defilement, the abomination, the abominable things, nothing untrue. And that brings us to a rather sobering question when we start looking at those things here, and we kind of confront right here at the end of the chapter, what size of sin does it take to keep us out of heaven? Well, the key is that there's no need really to rank severity of sin. And what it comes down to is that any sin will keep us out of heaven. No sin can enter. So any sin is too big. But if we purpose to go with God and we surrender our all to Him, then we can know the reality of being free from sin forever. While it may seem harsh now, that's exactly what we would want when we make it safely in. We don't want sin there. We don't want to have to deal with this curse any longer. With all the things from which we long for deliverance, we need to be sure that we're present in that final day. We've made it safely in. Heaven's a wonderful place. It's prepared for those who love God, but it's also an exclusive place. And there's some things that won't be there. Some things we're glad for. No need for faith. There'll be no night, no rivals, no sin. But we need to be sure that ours are all forgiven and that we're ready to go.